Note on contemporary events. This historical analysis deliberately concludes prior to the events of October 2023 and the subsequent Gaza conflict. As historians, we recognize that ongoing situations require temporal distance for proper scholarly assessment. The recent escalation represents an active, evolving situation where facts remain contested, casualty figures continue to change, and diplomatic efforts are still unfolding. Historical scholarship demands careful evaluation of primary sources, consideration of multiple perspectives, and the contextual understanding that comes with temporal distance. Therefore, this chapter maintains its focus on established historical developments rather than attempting to analyze events still unfolding at the time of publication. This approach preserves the academic integrity of the work while acknowledging the continuing importance of these issues in contemporary international relations. The history of Palestine, a crossroads of civilization and conflict. Palestine, a region of profound geographical and historical significance, occupies a pivotal position at the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. This land, roughly encompassing modern-day Israel, the Palestinian territories, and parts of Jordan, has served as a crucial crossroads connecting Africa, Asia, and Europe throughout human history. For millennia, Palestine has been a nexus of cultural exchange, commercial activity, imperial ambition, and religious devotion, a land where civilizations have met, mingled, and often clashed. The geographical significance of Palestine extends beyond its position as a land bridge. Its diverse landscape, from the fertile coastal plains to the central highlands and the Jordan Valley, has supported human habitation for millennia. The Mediterranean coastline, with its natural harbors, facilitated maritime trade and cultural exchange with distant civilizations. The central hill country, with its defensible positions and abundant springs, provided security and sustenance for early settlements. The Jordan Valley, part of the Great Rift Valley system, created a natural eastern boundary while serving as an important north-south transportation corridor. This varied topography has influenced settlement patterns, agricultural practices, and trade routes that have shaped the region's development. Palestine's climate further enhanced its appeal for human settlement. The Mediterranean climate of the coastal and highland regions, characterized by mild, rainy winters and hot, dry summers, proved ideal for agriculture. The cultivation of the Mediterranean triad, wheat, olives, and grapes, formed the backbone of the region's agricultural economy for thousands of years. In the more arid eastern regions, pastoral nomadism complemented settled agriculture, creating economic interdependence between different lifestyles and communities. The region's strategic location made it a coveted prize for successive empires. From the ancient Egyptians and Assyrians to the Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, various Islamic caliphates, Crusaders, Mamluks, Ottomans, and finally the British, Palestine has rarely known extended periods of political independence. Each imperial power left its mark on the land and its people, contributing layers to the rich palimpsest of Palestinian history and culture. Several key themes have dominated Palestine's complex history: religion as a defining force, with Jerusalem standing as a holy city for three major world faiths; colonialism repeatedly transforming the region from ancient empires to modern European mandates; and nationalism emerging as a powerful force in the 19th and 20th centuries, with competing Jewish and Arab national movements seeking self-determination in the same territory. The religious significance of Palestine, particularly Jerusalem, cannot be overstated. For Jews, it represents the land promised to Abraham and his descendants, the site of the ancient temples, and the focus of millennia of longing during the diaspora. For Christians, it is the land where Jesus was born, preached, was crucified, and resurrected, events that form the foundation of their faith. For Muslims, Jerusalem is the third holiest city after Mecca and Medina, the site of the Prophet Muhammad's night journey and ascension to heaven. This convergence of religious attachment has made Palestine a spiritual magnet, drawing pilgrims, scholars, and settlers throughout history. The modern history of Palestine has been profoundly shaped by the emergence of nationalist movements in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Zionism, a movement seeking to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine, gained momentum in response to persistent anti-Semitism in Europe. Simultaneously, Arab nationalism developed as a response to Ottoman decline and European colonial ambitions in the region. These competing national aspirations for the same territory set the stage for the protracted conflict that continues to this day. The British Mandate period, 1920 to 1948, marked a crucial transition in Palestine's history. Following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I, Britain assumed control of Palestine under a League of Nations mandate. During this period, Jewish immigration increased substantially, particularly as persecution of Jews intensified in Europe. Arab Palestinians, witnessing demographic changes and fearing dispossession, mounted increasing resistance to both British rule and Zionist settlement. The tensions culminated in the 1947 United Nations Partition Plan, the subsequent establishment of Israel in 1948, and the First Arab-Israeli War, events that Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, or catastrophe. Since 1948, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has dominated the region's politics and shaped the lives of millions. Multiple wars, 2 Palestinian uprisings, intifadas, peace negotiations, settlement expansion, and ongoing occupation have created a complex reality of physical separation, mutual suspicion, and recurring violence. Yet throughout this period, civil society initiatives, people-to-people contacts, and diplomatic efforts have also sought to build bridges of understanding and create pathways to peace. Understanding Palestine's history requires acknowledging multiple narratives and perspectives. The same events often carry profoundly different meanings for different communities. What one group celebrates as liberation, another mourns as catastrophe. What one side views as security measures, the other experiences as oppression. These competing narratives reflect not just different interpretations of history, but fundamentally different lived experiences. This book aims to present a comprehensive chronological account of Palestine's history, from prehistoric times to the present day. By examining the archaeological record, historical documents, oral histories, and contemporary developments, we seek to illuminate the complex interplay of geography, religion, culture, economics, and politics that has shaped this remarkable land and its diverse peoples. In doing so, we hope to contribute to a deeper understanding of both the roots of conflict and the possibilities for a more peaceful future. Prehistoric and Canaanite periods, c. 3500–1200 BCE. The story of Palestine begins with the earliest human migrations out of Africa. Archaeological evidence from sites like Ubaydiyah near the Sea of Galilee reveals human presence dating back approximately 1.5 million years ago, marking some of the earliest Homo erectus migrations beyond Africa. These early hominids left behind stone tools and animal remains that provide glimpses into their hunting and gathering lifestyle. For hundreds of thousands of years, small bands of hunter-gatherers moved through the landscape, following seasonal resources and adapting to changing climatic conditions. A significant transition occurred during the Epipaleolithic period, 20,000–10,000 BCE, with the emergence of the Natufian culture, c. 12,800–10,300 BCE. The Natufians represent a crucial bridge between nomadic hunter-gatherer societies and the first permanent settlements. At sites like Ainan on Malaha, in the Upper Jordan Valley, and El Wad on Mount Carmel, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of semi-permanent villages with stone structures, storage facilities, and cemeteries. The Natufians harvested wild cereals using flint sickles, ground seeds with stone mortars and pestles, and hunted gazelles and other game. Their sophisticated material culture included shell ornaments, bone tools, and figurative art, suggesting complex social and possibly religious practices. The Neolithic Revolution transformed Palestine between 10,000 and 5,000 BCE. During the pre-pottery Neolithic A period, c. 10,000–8,800 BCE, communities like Jericho began cultivating domesticated forms of wheat, barley, and legumes while continuing to hunt wild animals. By the pre-pottery Neolithic B period, 8,800–6,500 BCE, domesticated goats and sheep supplemented farming, creating a more stable food supply that supported larger settlements. Jericho, standing as one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited cities, developed into a substantial settlement of perhaps 2,000, 3,000 inhabitants. Archaeological findings at Tel es Sultan and Jericho reveal sophisticated structures, including massive defensive walls, religious shrines, and a 28-foot stone tower with an internal staircase, evidence of communal organization and labor mobilization on an unprecedented scale. The pottery Neolithic period, 6,500–5,000 BCE, saw the introduction of ceramic technology, allowing for more efficient food storage and preparation. At sites like Sha'ar Hagalan in the Jordan Valley, archaeologists have uncovered planned settlements with rectilinear buildings arranged along streets, suggesting increasing social complexity. Clay figurines found at these sites, particularly female forms, may indicate religious practices focused on fertility and regeneration. The Chalcolithic period, 5,000–3,500 BCE, marked another significant transition with the introduction of copper metallurgy. At sites like Telilat Gasul near the Dead Sea and Beersheba in the northern Negev, archaeologists have discovered copper maceheads, chisels, and ornaments alongside sophisticated pottery, ivory carvings, and wall paintings. Social stratification became more pronounced during this period, with evidence of craft specialization and long-distance trade networks extending to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia. The early Bronze Age, 3,500–2,000 BCE, witnessed the emergence of the first true urban societies in Palestine. According to the World History Encyclopedia, nomads settled the region and initiated agriculture during the early Bronze Age, when cities developed and trade expanded, making Palestine an important trade hub. Fortified settlements like Megiddo, Bet Yera, and Ai featured monumental architecture, specialized craft production, and administrative systems. These early city-states controlled surrounding agricultural territories and engaged in trade networks that connected Egypt, Syria, Mesopotamia, and the Aegean. The development of olive oil and wine production during this period created valuable export commodities that stimulated economic growth. The urban civilization of early Bronze Age Palestine collapsed around 2200 BCE, possibly due to climate change, environmental degradation, or social upheaval. The subsequent Intermediate Bronze Age, 2200–2000 BCE, saw a return to more pastoral and village-based lifestyles, with a decrease in settlement size and complexity. The Middle Bronze Age, 2000–1550 BCE, marked a resurgence of urban civilization in Palestine, characterized by massive fortifications, palaces, and temples. Cities like Hazor in the north grew to over 200 acres with populations of perhaps 15,000–20,000 people. During this period, Palestine was absorbed by the Egyptian Empire and flourished in trade. Archaeological evidence reveals extensive commercial connections with Egypt, Cyprus, and the Aegean. The material culture of this period shows strong Canaanite characteristics, including distinctive pottery forms, bronze weapons and tools, and religious artifacts like figurines of the goddess Astarte. The Late Bronze Age, 1550–1200 BCE, was dominated by Egyptian imperial control following the expulsion of the Hyksos from Egypt. Egyptian garrisons were stationed at strategic locations, and local Canaanite rulers served as vassals to the pharaoh. The Amarna letters, a diplomatic archive from 14th century BCE Egypt, document the political fragmentation of Canaan into competing city-states that frequently appealed to Egypt for support against rivals and nomadic groups called Apiru or Habaru. This period saw unprecedented international connections with Mycenaean, Cypriot, and Egyptian goods circulating throughout Palestine. Around 1276 BCE, the Philistines arrived in Palestine and settled on the coastal plain, giving the region part of its name. The Philistines were one of several Sea Peoples groups that migrated from the Aegean region during the collapse of late Bronze Age civilizations. They established a pentapolis of 5 major cities, Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath, and introduced distinctive cultural elements including Aegean-style pottery, iron technology, and unique architectural features. The term Palestine was originally a designation for an area in southern Canaan, which the Philistines occupied a small part of, though it would later be applied to the broader region by the Romans. The Canaanite civilization that flourished in Palestine during the Bronze Age made significant contributions to world culture. The Canaanites developed one of the earliest alphabetic writing systems, which would eventually evolve into the Phoenician alphabet, the precursor to Greek, Latin, and most modern Western scripts. Their religious practices, centered around deities like El-Baal, Asherah, and Anat, influenced later Israelite religion despite biblical polemics against Canaanite worship. Canaanite myths, partially preserved in texts from Ugarit in Syria, reveal sophisticated literary traditions that parallel biblical narratives. Archaeological excavations at sites throughout Palestine have uncovered impressive material remains from the Canaanite period, including massive city walls, palaces, temples, and tombs. At Megiddo, archaeologists discovered a sophisticated water system that channeled spring water through a tunnel beneath the city walls, allowing residents access during sieges. At Hazor, a monumental temple complex featured basalt orthostats, upright stone slabs, carved with mythological scenes. These architectural achievements demonstrate the technical skill and organizational capacity of Canaanite society. The late Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE brought dramatic changes to Palestine. The breakdown of imperial systems, climate change, internal rebellions, and migrations of new peoples created instability throughout the eastern Mediterranean. This period of disruption set the stage for the emergence of new political entities in the Iron Age, including the Israelite kingdoms and Philistine city-states that would dominate the subsequent phase of Palestine's history. Following the late Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, the central highlands of Canaan witnessed a significant transformation with the emergence of hundreds of small village settlements. This period, known as Iron Age I, 1200 to 1000 BCE, marks a crucial transition in Palestine's history and the beginnings of Israelite identity. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Israelites emerged largely from the indigenous Canaanite population rather than conquering the region by force as traditionally depicted in biblical narratives. The emergence of Israel in Canaan. The archaeological record reveals a dramatic increase in small, unwalled settlements in the central hill country during the 12th and 11th centuries BCE. Surveys have documented approximately 250-300 such villages, typically consisting of clusters of pillared houses arranged in an oval or circular pattern. These settlements were characterized by simple agricultural technology, terraced farming, and cisterns for water collection, adaptations to the challenging highland environment. Material culture from these sites shows strong continuity with late Bronze Age Canaanite traditions, but with notable differences. The absence of imported luxury goods, pig bones, suggesting dietary restrictions, and certain cultic items points to an emerging distinct identity. The pottery assemblage, known as Israelite collared rim jars, while once thought to be uniquely Israelite, is now recognized as a regional highland phenomenon not exclusive to Israelite sites. The Merneptah Stela, an Egyptian victory monument dated to approximately 1208 BCE, contains the earliest known reference to Israel as a people group. The inscription states that Israel is laid waste, its seed is not, indicating that by this time a group identified as Israel existed in Canaan and was significant enough to be mentioned alongside city-states like Ashkelon and Gezer. The period of the Judges. The biblical narrative describes this period as the time of the Judges, when Israel existed as a loose confederation of tribes without centralized leadership. Archaeological evidence partially supports this picture of decentralized, largely self-sufficient communities connected by kinship, shared religious practices, and periodic cooperation against external threats. The material record shows limited social stratification during this period, suggesting an egalitarian ethos consistent with the biblical portrayal of tribal society. However, sites like Shiloh, which according to biblical tradition house the Ark of the Covenant, show evidence of regional cultic importance. Excavations at Shiloh revealed a possible sacred precinct dating to the 12th-11th centuries BCE, which was violently destroyed, possibly corresponding to the Philistine capture of the Ark described in 1 Samuel. The biblical accounts of conflicts with surrounding peoples, particularly the Philistines, find some archaeological correlation. Philistine material culture, with its Aegean characteristics, appears along the coastal plain around 1175 BCE, creating a clear cultural boundary with the highland settlements. Evidence of destruction at several sites along the highland coastal plain border may reflect the tensions described in biblical narratives. The rise of the monarchy. According to biblical chronology, the Kingdom of Israel was founded in Palestine around 1080 BCE under Saul, the first king. Archaeological evidence for this early monarchic period remains limited and contested. The site of Gibeah, Tel el-Ful, traditionally identified as Saul's capital, yielded a modest fortress structure from this period, suggesting a rudimentary level of political organization. The transition to monarchy likely resulted from several factors: external threats, particularly from the Philistines, population growth, increasing social complexity, and the emergence of charismatic leaders. This process accelerated under David, CT 1970 BCE, who, according to biblical accounts, unified the northern and southern tribes and established Jerusalem as his capital after defeating the Jebusites. Archaeological evidence for David's reign has been the subject of intense debate. The House of David inscription discovered at Tel Dan in 1993 provides the first clear extra-biblical reference to the Davidic dynasty, confirming its historical existence. Recent excavations at sites like Khirbet Qeiyafa in the Elah Valley have uncovered a fortified city dating to the early 10th century BCE, which some archaeologists associate with David's kingdom. However, as noted in the article David and Solomon's Invisible Kingdom from Biblical Archaeology Review, the archaeological footprint of David's kingdom may be limited because it comprised mostly pastoral nomads, along with some city dwellers and townspeople, making it largely invisible in the archaeological record. Solomon and the United Monarchy. Solomon's reign, 970 to 931 BCE, represents the apex of the United Monarchy in biblical tradition. The Bible describes an era of unprecedented prosperity, international trade, and monumental building projects, including the First Temple in Jerusalem. Archaeological evidence for this period has been the subject of ongoing scholarly debate. Traditionally, archaeologists attributed certain monumental structures to Solomon's building activities, particularly the six-chambered gates and casemate walls at Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer, sites specifically mentioned in 1 Kings 9:15 as Solomon's building projects. However, revised chronologies proposed by some scholars have challenged this attribution, suggesting these structures date to the 9th century BCE during the Omride dynasty of the Northern Kingdom. Recent excavations at Megiddo have uncovered large administrative buildings, stables, and water systems dating to the 10th century BCE, which some archaeologists associate with Solomon's reign. Similarly, the large stone structure and stepped stone structure discovered in Jerusalem's City of David area have been interpreted by some as possible remains of David's palace, though this identification remains contested. The divided monarchy. Following Solomon's death around 931 BCE, the United Monarchy fractured into two separate kingdoms: the northern kingdom of Israel with its capital eventually at Samaria, and the southern kingdom of Judah centered on Jerusalem. This political division would define Israelite history for the next 2 centuries. The northern kingdom, encompassing the territories of most of the tribes except Judah and Benjamin, was economically prosperous due to its control of major trade routes and fertile agricultural lands. Archaeological excavations at Samaria, established as the capital by King Omri around 880 BCE, revealed impressive building projects, including a royal acropolis with a palace complex featuring finely dressed ashlar masonry and ivory decorations. The southern kingdom of Judah, though smaller and less wealthy, benefited from the stability of the Davidic dynasty and the religious significance of Jerusalem. The kingdom experienced significant growth during the 8th century BCE, with Jerusalem expanding beyond its original City of David location onto the Western Hill. Archaeological evidence shows a dramatic increase in settlement throughout Judah during this period, with population estimates for Jerusalem reaching 15,000–20,000 by the late 8th century BCE. Assyrian conquest and the fall of Israel. The rise of the Neo-Assyrian Empire in the 8th century BCE dramatically altered the political landscape of the Levant. Under Tiglath-Pileser III, 745–727 BCE, Assyria began a systematic campaign of conquest that would eventually engulf both Israelite kingdoms. In 722 BCE, after a 3-year siege, the Assyrian king Sargon II conquered Samaria, ending the political independence of the northern tribes. According to Assyrian records, approximately 27,190 Israelites were deported and resettled throughout the Assyrian Empire, while foreign populations were brought into the conquered territories, a policy designed to break national resistance and ensure submission. Archaeological evidence confirms the violent destruction of numerous Israelite cities during this period. Excavations at Hazor, Megiddo, and Dan reveal destruction layers dating to the Assyrian conquests. The material culture of the region shows significant changes following the Assyrian conquest, with the introduction of Assyrian administrative practices, architectural styles, and cultural influences. The Kingdom of Judah initially survived as an Assyrian vassal state. Under King Hezekiah, 715–687 BCE, Judah attempted to assert independence, leading to a massive Assyrian invasion in 701 BCE by Sennacherib. The Assyrian king claims in his annals to have conquered 46 fortified cities of Judah and to have shut up Hezekiah like a bird in a cage in Jerusalem, though he does not claim to have captured the city itself. Archaeological evidence for this campaign is substantial. Excavations at Lachish, Judah's second city, revealed dramatic evidence of the Assyrian siege, including a massive assault ramp, hundreds of arrowheads, and a mass burial of approximately 1,500 individuals. Jerusalem itself shows evidence of frantic preparations for the siege, including the construction of the Siloam Tunnel to secure the city's water supply and massive fortification walls. Babylonian conquest and the fall of Judah. Following the decline of Assyrian power in the late 7th century BCE, the Neo-Babylonian Empire emerged as the dominant force in the Near East. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon extended its control over the former Assyrian territories, including the Kingdom of Judah. In 597 BCE, following a rebellion by Judah's king Jehoiakim, Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem. His successor, Jehoiachin, surrendered and, according to both biblical and Babylonian records, was taken to Babylon along with the royal court, elite craftsmen, and temple treasures. Zedekiah, installed as a puppet king, eventually rebelled as well, leading to a second Babylonian campaign. Between 598 to 582 BCE, the Babylonians invaded Palestine, culminating in a devastating 18-month siege of Jerusalem. In 586 BCE, the city fell, and according to biblical accounts, the Temple of Solomon was destroyed, the city walls demolished, and much of the population deported to Babylon. Archaeological evidence confirms widespread destruction throughout Judah during this period. Excavations in Jerusalem have uncovered ash layers, arrowheads, and abandoned buildings dating to this destruction. Similarly, excavations at Lachish, Arad, and other Judean sites reveal evidence of Babylonian attacks. The Babylonian conquest marked the end of the Kingdom of Judah and initiated the period known as the Babylonian exile. This catastrophic event profoundly transformed Israelite religion and identity, setting the stage for the emergence of Judaism as we know it today. The exilic community in Babylon preserved and redacted many of the biblical texts, developing theological explanations for their national tragedy and laying the groundwork for eventual restoration. Religious and cultural developments. The Iron Age witnessed significant developments in Israelite religion. Archaeological evidence suggests that early Israelite religious practices shared many features with Canaanite religion, including open-air sanctuaries, standing stones, masabot, and possibly the worship of multiple deities alongside Yahweh. Excavations have uncovered numerous small shrines and cult places throughout Israel and Judah. The discovery of inscriptions at Kuntilet Adrud in the Sinai and Kirbet el-Qom in Judah that mention Yahweh and his Asherah suggests that some Israelites associated a female consort with Yahweh, contrary to later Orthodox monotheism. Over time, religious practices became increasingly centralized, particularly in Judah. King Hezekiah and later King Josiah implemented religious reforms aimed at centralizing worship in Jerusalem and eliminating local shrines. Archaeological evidence partially confirms these reforms, with many local sanctuaries showing signs of abandonment during these periods. The development of literacy and scribal traditions played a crucial role in Israelite culture. The emergence of alphabetic writing made literacy more accessible than earlier cuneiform or hieroglyphic systems. Inscriptions from this period, including the Gezer calendar, the Siloam inscription, and numerous ostraka, inscribed pottery sherds, demonstrate the spread of writing beyond elite circles. Material culture and daily life. Archaeological excavations provide insights into the daily life of ancient Israelites. The typical Israelite house was the four-room house, consisting of three parallel long rooms with a broad room across the back. This design, which became standard throughout Israel and Judah, accommodated both human habitation and animal sheltering, reflecting the agro-pastoral economy. Diet consisted primarily of cereals, wheat and barley, legumes, olives, grapes, and occasional meat from sheep, goats, and cattle. Wine and olive oil production became increasingly important economic activities, as evidenced by numerous oil and wine presses discovered throughout the region. Craft production shows increasing specialization over time. Pottery production evolved from household manufacture to workshop production, with regional styles developing distinctive characteristics. Metallurgy advanced significantly, with iron gradually replacing bronze for tools and weapons, though bronze remained important for decorative items. Trade networks expanded during this period, particularly during the monarchic era. Imported items found at Israelite sites include cedar from Lebanon, copper from Cyprus, ivory from Syria and Egypt, and luxury goods from throughout the Mediterranean world. The development of standardized weights and measures facilitated commercial transactions. The archaeological record reveals significant regional variations in material culture between the northern and southern kingdoms, reflecting their different economic circumstances and international connections. The northern kingdom shows stronger connections to Phoenician and Syrian traditions, while Judah maintained a more conservative material culture with stronger links to the desert regions to the south and east. By the end of the Iron Age, the Israelite kingdoms had developed complex social, political, and religious institutions that would continue to evolve during the subsequent Babylonian and Persian periods. Despite the political destruction of Israel and Judah, the cultural and religious traditions that emerged during this formative period would prove remarkably resilient, forming the foundation for Second Temple Judaism and ultimately influencing the development of Christianity and Islam. Persian, Hellenistic, and Roman periods, 539 BCE, 136 CE, Persian period, 539 to 332 BCE. The Persian conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE marked a significant turning point for the people of Judah. Under Cyrus the Great's rule, exiled Jews received permission to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. This momentous decree, recorded in the Cyrus Cylinder, reflected the Persian policy of religious tolerance toward conquered peoples. The first wave of returnees, led by Sheshbazzar and later Zerubbabel, faced the daunting task of rebuilding a devastated homeland. The construction of the Second Temple began around 538 BCE, but faced numerous obstacles. Local opposition from Samaritans and other groups, combined with economic hardships, delayed completion until approximately 516 BCE, during Darius Thirt's reign. The prophets Haggai and Zechariah played crucial roles in motivating the community to complete this central project. Though smaller and less ornate than Solomon's temple, this structure became the focal point of Jewish religious life. Persian administration organized the empire into satrapies, with Palestine falling within the satrapy of Ebernari, beyond the river. Judah itself became the smaller province of Yehud, with archaeological evidence of its boundaries coming from stamped jar handles and coins bearing the Paleo-Hebrew inscription YHD. The province's territory was significantly smaller than the pre-exilic kingdom, centered around Jerusalem and extending approximately 20 miles in radius. A second major wave of returnees arrived under Ezra around 458 BCE, focusing on religious reforms and the implementation of Torah law. Nehemiah followed in 445 BCE, serving as governor and overseeing the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls despite fierce regional opposition. His administrative reforms addressed economic inequalities and strengthened the province's security and identity. The period witnessed significant religious developments that shaped Judaism's future. The Torah achieved its final form, and the shift from prophecy to scriptural interpretation began. The absence of a Davidic monarch elevated the high priest status, creating a theocratic governance structure. Synagogues likely emerged during this time as centers for prayer and study, complementing the temple's sacrificial worship. Archaeological findings reveal a modest material culture with limited Persian influence in daily life. Rural settlements predominated, with Jerusalem housing perhaps 500 residents, a fraction of its pre-exilic population. Persian period pottery, architecture, and burial practices show continuity with local traditions while incorporating some imperial elements. Administrative bullae, clay seals, and coins provide evidence of the province's bureaucratic structure and economic activities. The Persian period's relative stability allowed for the consolidation of Jewish identity after the trauma of exile. The community's focus on religious observance, scriptural preservation, and ethnic boundaries established patterns that would prove crucial for survival during subsequent periods of foreign domination. Hellenistic period 332 to 167 BCE. Alexander the Great's lightning campaign through the Levant in 332 BCE brought Palestine under Hellenistic control. His legendary visit to Jerusalem, described in later sources, symbolized the beginning of Greek cultural influence in the region. Alexander's respect for local customs initially eased the transition from Persian to Macedonian rule. After Alexander's premature death in 323 BCE, his generals, the Diadochi, fought for control of his vast empire. Palestine became a contested borderland between the Ptolemaic kingdom based in Egypt and the Seleucid Empire centered in Syria. The Ptolemies controlled the region from 301 to 200 BCE, establishing administrative centers and introducing Greek institutions. The Battle of Panium in 200 BCE transferred control to the Seleucids under Antiochus III, who initially granted the Jews favorable terms of autonomy. Hellenistic influence transformed urban landscapes across Palestine. Cities adopted Greek architectural elements, including agoras, marketplaces, gymnasiums, theaters, and colonnaded streets. Coastal cities like Akko, renamed Ptolemais, and Jaffa flourished as commercial hubs. New Hellenistic foundations included Scythopolis, Beth Shean, and Philadelphia, Amman. Even Jerusalem acquired some Hellenistic characteristics, though it remained more conservative than coastal or Transjordanian cities. Economic changes accompanied cultural shifts. The monetization of the economy accelerated, with Ptolemaic and later Seleucid coins circulating alongside locally minted issues. Agricultural production intensified to meet export demands, particularly for olive oil, wine, and grain. Trade networks expanded, connecting Palestine more firmly to Mediterranean markets. Taxation systems became more systematic, sometimes creating hardship for rural populations. The period witnessed complex social responses to Hellenization. The Jewish aristocracy, particularly the priestly families, often embraced Greek education, paideia, and customs while maintaining their religious leadership. The Tobiads exemplified this Hellenized elite, maintaining connections with both the Jerusalem establishment and Ptolemaic court. Meanwhile, rural populations and traditional religious groups remained more insulated from Hellenistic influence. Intellectual and religious developments reflected both adaptation to and resistance against Hellenism. The translation of Hebrew scriptures into Greek, the Septuagint, begun in Alexandria around 270 BCE, made Jewish traditions accessible to Greek-speaking audiences while incorporating Hellenistic literary conventions. Wisdom literature like Ben Sira, Ecclesiasticus, and philosophical works like 4 Maccabees attempted to reconcile Jewish and Greek thought. Apocalyptic literature, including portions of Daniel, emerged as a response to cultural threats, envisioning divine intervention against oppressive powers. The Seleucid financial crisis under Antiochus IV Epiphanes, 175-164 BCE, precipitated the Hellenistic period's most dramatic events. Desperate for revenue, Antiochus supported the Hellenizing high priest Jason, who established a gymnasium in Jerusalem. When Jason was outbid by Menelaus for the high priesthood, civil strife erupted. Antiochus, returning from a humiliating retreat from Egypt in 168 BCE, interpreted Jerusalem's unrest as rebellion. His subsequent suppression included prohibiting circumcision and Sabbath observance, installing pagan worship in the temple, and executing those who resisted. These unprecedented religious persecutions transformed cultural tensions into open conflict. Maccabean revolt and Hasmonean dynasty 167-63 BCE. The Maccabean revolt began in the village of Modin when the priest Mattathias refused to perform a pagan sacrifice and killed both a compliant Jew and the king's officer. Fleeing to the hills with his 5 sons, he initiated a guerrilla campaign against Seleucid forces and Hellenizing Jews. After Mattathias' death in 166 BCE, his third son Judah, nicknamed Maccabee, the Hammer, assumed leadership. Judah Maccabee proved an exceptional military strategist, defeating larger Seleucid armies through ambush tactics, mobility, and knowledge of terrain. His victories at Beth Horon, Emmaus, and Beth Zur demonstrated the effectiveness of asymmetric warfare against conventional forces. By December 164 BCE, the Maccabees recaptured Jerusalem, purified the temple, and restored traditional worship, an 8-day celebration commemorated in the festival of Hanukkah. However, the Acra fortress in Jerusalem remained under Seleucid control, symbolizing the incomplete nature of the victory. The revolt's character evolved over time. Initially focused on religious freedom, it gradually developed political ambitions. After Judah's death in battle, 160 BCE, his brother Jonathan assumed leadership, skillfully exploiting Seleucid dynastic conflicts to gain concessions. In 152 BCE, Alexander Belos appointed Jonathan as high priest, despite his lack of Zadokite lineage, a controversial move that merged political and religious authority. Jonathan's brother Simon completed the transition to independence, expelling the Seleucid garrison from the Acra in 141 BCE and receiving recognition as high priest, military commander, and ethnarch, national leader, until a true prophet should arise. The Hasmonean dynasty consolidated power under Simon's son John Hyrcanus I, 134-104 BCE, who expanded the state's territory through military campaigns against the Idumeans, Edomites, in the south, the Samaritans in the north, and Transjordanian regions. He destroyed the Samaritan temple on Mount Gerizim and forced Idumeans to convert to Judaism or leave their homeland. His son Aristobulus I, 104-103 BCE, briefly ruled as the first to explicitly claim the title of king, completing the transformation from priestly leadership to monarchy. Alexander Jannaeus, 103-76 BCE, represented Hasmonean power at its zenith. His conquests extended Jewish control to the Mediterranean coast and portions of the Golan and Transjordan, creating the largest Jewish state since Solomon's reign. However, his brutal suppression of internal opposition, including crucifying 800 Pharisaic opponents, revealed the regime's increasingly autocratic nature. The state's expansion came at the cost of significant Hellenization in governance, military organization, and court culture, ironically adopting many practices against which the Maccabees had originally rebelled. The Hasmonean period witnessed the crystallization of major Jewish religious factions. The Pharisees advocated for the application of temple purity practices to everyday life and recognized an oral tradition alongside written Torah. The Sadducees, associated with the priestly aristocracy, rejected oral tradition and focused on temple ritual. The Essenes withdrew from what they viewed as a corrupted temple establishment to form communities dedicated to strict purity observance, with some scholars connecting them to the Dead Sea Scrolls community at Qumran. These divisions reflected broader debates about how Judaism should respond to Hellenistic influence and how religious authority should be structured. Queen Salome Alexandra's reign, 76 to 67 BCE, brought a period of stability and Pharisaic ascendancy. However, the succession dispute between her sons Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II invited Roman intervention, with both claimants appealing to Pompey for support. This fateful decision ended Hasmonean independence and began Roman domination of Palestine. Roman period, 63 BCE, 136 CE. Pompey's conquest of Jerusalem in 63 BCE marked Rome's direct entry into Palestinian affairs. After a 3-month siege of the Temple Mount, Roman forces breached the defenses on a Sabbath. Pompey entered the Holy of Holies, an unprecedented violation that shocked the Jewish population but left the temple treasures intact. He significantly reduced Hasmonean territory, liberating Hellenistic cities to form the Decapolis League, and required tribute payment to Rome. Hyrcanus II was appointed high priest but denied the title of king, with the Idumean Antipater serving as the effective Roman administrator. The following decade saw Palestine entangled in Rome's civil wars. Julius Caesar confirmed Hyrcanus as ethnarch and Antipater as procurator in 47 BCE. After Antipater's assassination in 43 BCE, his son Herod gradually consolidated power, receiving the Roman Senate's appointment as king of the Jews in 40 BCE. Only in 37 BCE, after a brutal siege of Jerusalem and execution of Antigonus, the last Hasmonean ruler, did Herod secure his throne. Herod the Great's 33-year reign, 37 to 4 BCE, transformed Palestine's physical and political landscape. His architectural program included rebuilding the temple on a grand scale, constructing the artificial harbor at Caesarea Maritima, and establishing fortress palaces at Masada, Herodium, and Machaerus. These projects employed Hellenistic and Roman architectural techniques while respecting Jewish religious sensibilities in sacred contexts. The massive temple platform, still visible as the Haram al-Sharif, remained the largest sacred precinct in the Roman world. Politically, Herod maintained internal control through a combination of brutality, strategic marriages, and constant surveillance. His elimination of potential rivals extended to his own family, including his wife Mariamne, of Hasmonean descent, and several sons. Externally, he cultivated close relationships with Rome's elite, particularly Marcus Agrippa and Augustus himself. This balancing act, appearing sufficiently Jewish to his subjects while proving his Hellenistic sophistication to Rome, characterized his entire reign. Economically, Herod's building programs provided employment but required heavy taxation. His international connections facilitated trade, and the kingdom experienced a material prosperity, particularly in Jerusalem and the new cities. However, wealth disparities increased, with rural peasantry bearing the heaviest burdens. Religious tensions simmered beneath the surface, with apocalyptic expectations and messianic hopes reflecting widespread discontent with foreign domination and corrupt leadership. After Herod's death in 4 BCE, Augustus divided the kingdom among 3 surviving sons. Archelaus received Judea, Samaria, and Idumea. Herod Antipas governed Galilee and Perea, and Philip administered northern Transjordan. Archelaus's incompetent rule led to his deposition in 6 CE, with his territories becoming the Roman province of Judea under prefects procurators, while the other tetrarchies remained semi-autonomous until fully incorporated into the provincial system by 100 CE. Direct Roman rule intensified tensions. The census of Quirinius in 6 ACE, conducted to assess taxation potential, sparked the formation of the Fourth Philosophy or Zealot movement under Judas the Galilean, advocating resistance to foreign taxation as religious obligation. Pontius Pilate's governorship, 26 to 36 CE, featured several provocations, including bringing military standards bearing the emperor's image into Jerusalem and misappropriating temple funds for an aqueduct project. This period witnessed significant religious ferment. John the Baptist's ministry called for moral renewal in preparation for divine judgment. Jesus of Nazareth's teaching career, culminating in his execution around 30 CE, initiated the movement that would eventually separate from Judaism as Christianity. Various prophetic and messianic figures attracted followers by promising miraculous deliverance, including Theudas and the Egyptian, mentioned in both Roman and Jewish sources. Tensions escalated under Procurator Gessius Florus, 64 to 66 CE, whose excessive taxation and provocative actions triggered the First Jewish Revolt. Initial rebel successes, including the defeat of the Syrian legion under Cestius Gallus, prompted Emperor Nero to dispatch his general Vespasian with substantial forces. The Roman reconquest proceeded methodically from the periphery inward, with Galilee falling by 68 CE, despite fierce resistance at Jotapata, led by the future historian Josephus. Jerusalem's siege by Vespasian's son Titus began in April 70 CE, with the city divided between moderate and radical rebel factions. Despite internal conflicts, the defenders resisted for 5 months before the Romans breached the walls in August. The temple was destroyed by fire on the 9th of Av, August 30th, the same date tradition assigned to the first temple's destruction by Babylon. The upper city held out until September, when resistance collapsed. Josephus claimed over 1 million casualties, though modern estimates suggest Jerusalem's population was approximately 80,000. The revolt's aftermath brought significant changes. The temple's destruction eliminated Judaism's sacrificial center, accelerating the transition to Rabbinic Judaism focused on Torah study, prayer, and communal organization. The Fiscus Judaicus, Jewish tax, redirected the former temple tax to Jupiter Capitolinus in Rome, adding financial insult to religious injury. Judea became a full province with a legionary garrison at Jerusalem, while Yavne emerged as a center for religious reconstruction under Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai and later Rabban Gamaliel II. Relative stability followed until Emperor Hadrian's announcement in 130 CE that Jerusalem would be rebuilt as the Roman colony Aelia Capitolina, with a temple to Jupiter on the Temple Mount. This plan, combined with a possible ban on circumcision, triggered the Bar Kokhba Revolt, 132 to 136 CE. Led by Simon Bar Kokhba, renamed Bar Kokhba, son of the star, with messianic implications, the rebels established an independent state that minted coins declaring Year 1 of the redemption of Israel and Year 2 of the freedom of Jerusalem. Rome responded with overwhelming force. Hadrian recalled his leading general Julius Severus from Britain, eventually deploying 12 legions, half the empire's total, against the rebellion. After recapturing Jerusalem, the Romans methodically reduced rebel strongholds in the Judean hills and finally the desert fortress of Beitar in 135 CE. Casualties were enormous, with Cassius Dio reporting 580,000 Jewish deaths in direct conflict, plus countless more from disease and starvation. Hadrian's punitive measures transformed the region. Jerusalem became Aelia Capitolina, a Roman colony forbidden to Jews. Judea was renamed Syria-Palestina, deliberately evoking the ancient Philistines to erase Jewish associations. The Jewish population, devastated by casualties and enslavement, shifted its center to Galilee. The Bar Kokhba revolt marked the end of Jewish sovereignty in Palestine until the modern era and completed the transition from temple-centered to diaspora-oriented Judaism. This period's conclusion left an indelible mark on Palestine's religious and cultural landscape. The region entered the Byzantine era with a transformed demographic composition, altered settlement patterns, and religious communities adapting to profound changes in their circumstances and self-understanding. Medieval and Islamic periods, 7th century Ottoman rule, early Islamic rule 634 to 750 CE. The Byzantine-Sassanid wars of the early 7th century had severely weakened both empires, creating a power vacuum that the emerging Islamic State quickly exploited. Following Muhammad's death in 632 CE, the first caliph Abu Bakr consolidated Arabian tribes under Islamic rule before launching campaigns northward. The Muslim conquest of Palestine began in earnest under the second caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab. The initial invasion commenced with the Battle of Ajnadain in 634 CE, where Muslim forces under Khalid ibn al-Walid defeated the Byzantine army in southern Palestine. This victory opened the region to the further conquest. Damascus fell in 635 CE, followed by the decisive Battle of Yarmouk in 636 CE, which effectively ended Byzantine military resistance in Syria-Palestine. Jerusalem, however, held out until 637 to 638 CE. Jerusalem's surrender to Umar ibn al-Khattab marked a pivotal moment in the city's history. According to traditional accounts, Umar entered the city peacefully and was invited by the Christian patriarch Sophronius to pray at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Umar declined, choosing instead to pray outside the church to prevent future Muslim claims on the site. This act established a precedent for religious coexistence that would characterize much of early Islamic rule. The Pact of Umar, purportedly negotiated during the surrender, established the framework for treatment of non-Muslims, dhimmis, under Islamic governance. Christians and Jews received protected status, maintaining religious autonomy in exchange for payment of the jizya tax and acceptance of certain social restrictions. Archaeological evidence confirms that churches and synagogues continued to function throughout this transition period. Umar's lifting of the Byzantine ban on Jewish residents in Jerusalem transformed the city's demographic composition. Jewish communities previously restricted to a single synagogue on the Mount of Olives returned to the city proper. Some accounts suggest that Jews assisted in clearing debris from the Temple Mount, which had been used as a garbage dump during the Byzantine period. The site, known to Muslims as Haram al-Sharif, noble sanctuary, was identified with the location of Muhammad's night journey, Asra, and ascension Miraj, described in the Quran. Administrative reforms under the Rashidun Caliphate 632 to 661 CE organized Palestine into military districts, Ajnad. The region was divided between Jund Falastin, roughly corresponding to southern Palestine with its capital at Lud, later Ramla, and Jund al-Urdun, northern Palestine, and parts of Jordan. This administrative division would persist with modifications throughout the early Islamic period. The transition to Muslim rule brought significant economic changes. Arabic gradually replaced Greek as the administrative language, though Aramaic and other local languages persisted in daily use. The monetary system shifted from Byzantine coinage to Islamic dinars and dirhams, though archaeological evidence shows Byzantine coins remained in circulation for decades. Agricultural patterns initially continued with little disruption, focusing on the Mediterranean triad of wheat, olives, and grapes. The Umayyad and Abbasid periods, 661 to 969 CE, the Umayyad dynasty, established after the First Islamic Civil War, Fitna, transferred the caliphate's capital to Damascus in 661 CE. This proximity to Palestine elevated the region's importance, particularly Jerusalem's. The Umayyads initiated an ambitious building program that transformed Jerusalem's sacred landscape. The centerpiece of Umayyad construction was the Dome of the Rock, commissioned by Caliph Abd al-Malik and completed around 691 to 692 CE. This octagonal structure, built over the foundation stone, believed to be the site of Abraham's intended sacrifice of Isaac, Ishmael, and Muhammad's ascension, represented a masterpiece of early Islamic architecture. Its Byzantine-influenced mosaics and Quranic inscriptions proclaimed Islamic theology, while its golden dome created a visual counterpoint to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Archaeological evidence suggests the building incorporated materials from earlier Byzantine structures. Al-Walid I, 705-715 CE, continued the architectural transformation by constructing the Al-Aqsa Mosque at the southern end of the Haram al-Sharif. Together with administrative buildings and palaces, these structures created an impressive complex that established Jerusalem as the third holiest city in Islam after Mecca and Medina. The Umayyads also developed Ramla as a new administrative capital for Jund Falastin, constructing the White Mosque and establishing infrastructure including cisterns and markets. Rural Palestine experienced significant development during the Umayyad period. Archaeological surveys reveal the expansion of agricultural settlements, particularly in marginal areas. The Umayyads constructed desert palaces, kusur, throughout the region, including Kirbat al-Mafjar near Jericho and Kirbat al-Minya by the Sea of Galilee. These complexes served multiple functions as administrative centers, agricultural estates, and pleasure retreats. The Abbasid Revolution of 750 CE violently ended Umayyad rule. The massacre of Umayyad family members, with only Abd al-Rahman Noor escaping to Spain, marked a bloody transition. The Abbasids relocated the caliphate's capital to Baghdad, diminishing Palestine's political significance while maintaining its religious importance. Under Abbasid administration, Palestine experienced periods of neglect interspersed with renewed attention. The region suffered from reduced imperial investment and occasional tribal rebellions. The Yemenite uprising of 796 CE devastated parts of Palestine before being suppressed. Nevertheless, pilgrimage routes continued to bring visitors and commerce, sustaining urban centers. Agricultural innovation characterized the early Abbasid period, with new irrigation techniques and crop varieties introduced from other parts of the Islamic world. Sugar cultivation expanded significantly, with processing installations identified at sites like Jericho. Trade networks connected Palestine to distant markets, evidenced by the presence of Chinese porcelain and other imported goods in archaeological assemblages. By the mid-9th century, Abbasid central authority began to fragment. Ahmad ibn Tulun, governor of Egypt, established de facto independence and briefly controlled Palestine, 878 to 884 CE. After a brief Abbasid restoration, the Tulunids regained control until their defeat by the Abbasids in 905 CE. This pattern of contested control continued with the Ikhshidid dynasty, 935 and 969 CE, administering Palestine as nominal Abbasid governors while functioning as autonomous rulers. Fatimid, Crusader, and Ayyubid periods, 969 to 1250 CE. The Fatimid Caliphate, based in North Africa and claiming descent from Muhammad's daughter Fatima, conquered Egypt in 969 CE and extended their control to Palestine shortly thereafter. As Ismaili Shiites, the Fatimids represented a theological challenge to the Sunni Abbasids. Their rule brought relative stability to Palestine, though periodic Bedouin revolts and Byzantine incursions disrupted the northern regions. Jerusalem flourished under early Fatimid rule, with repairs to the Dome of the Rock and expansion of the city's markets. However, the eccentric Caliph al-Hakim bi Amr Allah, 996 to 1021 CE, initiated persecutions against Christians and Jews, culminating in the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in 1009 CE. This act damaged relations with Byzantium and Western European states. After al-Hakim's disappearance, more tolerant policies resumed, and the church was partially rebuilt by 1048 CE. The Fatimid period witnessed significant intellectual activity. The House of Wisdom in Cairo attracted scholars from across the Islamic world, including from Palestine. The physician and philosopher Ibn al-Haytham al-Hazin conducted groundbreaking work in optics during this era, while the geographer al-Muqaddasi, born in Jerusalem, produced detailed descriptions of Palestine's geography, economy, and social conditions. Fatimid control weakened in the mid-11th century, coinciding with the arrival of Seljuk Turks in the region. The Seljuks briefly captured Jerusalem in 1073 CE before Fatimid forces reclaimed it. This instability, combined with reports of mistreatment of Christian pilgrims, provided pretext for the First Crusade launched by Pope Urban II in 1095 CE. Crusader forces captured Jerusalem on July 15, 1099 CE, following a 5-week siege. The conquest culminated in a massacre of the city's Muslim and Jewish populations, an atrocity recorded by both Christian and Muslim chroniclers. Baldwin of Boulogne was crowned the first king of Jerusalem in 1100 CE, establishing a feudal state modeled on European structures but adapted to local conditions. The Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem controlled varying portions of Palestine, with additional Crusader states established in Tripoli, Antioch, and Edessa. Jerusalem itself was transformed with new construction, including the rebuilding of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the establishment of headquarters for military orders like the Templars and Hospitallers, and the conversion of the Al-Aqsa Mosque into the Temple of Solomon. The Dome of the Rock became the Templum Domini and received a Christian altar. Rural Palestine experienced significant changes under Crusader rule. Many Muslim villages were abandoned or depopulated, with European settlers establishing new agricultural communities. The sugar industry expanded considerably, with processing installations at sites like Montfort and Chorazim. Frankish architectural styles influenced both secular and religious buildings, while pottery and other material culture showed a blend of European and local traditions. Muslim responses to Crusader occupation evolved from initial shock to organized resistance. Imad ad-Din Zengi captured Edessa in 1144 CE, while his son Nur ad-Din unified Muslim Syria and created a power base for counter-crusade efforts. Nur ad-Din's general Shirkuh intervened in Fatimid Egypt, where his nephew Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, Saladin, eventually established the Ayyubid dynasty in 1171 CE. Saladin's victory at the Battle of Hattin on July 4, 1187 CE, destroyed Crusader military power and led to Jerusalem's recapture on October 2nd. Unlike the Crusaders in 1099, Saladin permitted the Christian population to depart after paying ransom, executing only those who could not pay. This clemency enhanced his reputation in both Muslim and Christian sources. The Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192 CE, led by Richard the Lionheart, failed to recapture Jerusalem but negotiated a treaty allowing Christian pilgrims access to the city. Under Ayyubid rule, Jerusalem was revitalized as an Islamic center. Saladin restored the Haram al-Sharif to Muslim worship, established the Salahiyya Madrasa theological school, and renovated the city's fortifications. His successors continued this pattern of religious patronage, constructing additional madrasas, khanqahs, Sufi lodges, and bimaristans, hospitals, throughout Palestine. The Ayyubid period witnessed significant intellectual and cultural achievements. Scholars like Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi produced important works in Islamic jurisprudence, while the poet and warrior Usama ibn Munkid recorded valuable observations on Crusader-Muslim interactions. The traveler Ibn Jubayr visited Jerusalem in 1184 CE, providing detailed descriptions of the city's religious sites and social conditions. Ayyubid control fragmented after Saladin's death in 1193 CE, with family members ruling various territories as semi-independent princes. This division weakened resistance to subsequent Crusader expeditions, including the Sixth Crusade, 1228 to 1229 CE, which secured Jerusalem temporarily through negotiation rather than conquest. The city changed hands several times before being permanently recaptured by the Khwarezmian Turks, acting as Ayyubid allies in 1244 CE. Mamluk and Ottoman rule, 1250–1917, Mamluk rule, 1250–1516 CE. The Mamluk Sultanate emerged from the military slave system that had served Ayyubid rulers. In 1250 CE, Mamluk officers overthrew the Ayyubid Sultan in Egypt and established their own dynasty. After defeating the Mongol invasion at Ain Jalut in 1260 CE, a battle fought in the Jezreel Valley of Palestine, the Mamluks became the dominant power in the eastern Mediterranean. Under Sultan Baybars 1260–1277 CE, the Mamluks systematically reduced Crusader territories. Caesarea, Haifa, and Arsu fell in 1265 CE, followed by Antioch in 1268 CE. Baybars also initiated an extensive building program in Jerusalem, restoring the Dome of the Rock's mosaics and constructing the Zahiriyya Madrasa. His successors continued the anti-Crusader campaign, with Sultan Qalawun capturing Tripoli in 1289 CE and his son Al-Ashraf Khalil taking Acre, the last major Crusader stronghold, in 1291 CE. The Mamluk period brought administrative reorganization to Palestine. The region was divided between the provinces Mamlaka of Damascus and Gaza, with Jerusalem holding special status as an independent district, Niyaba. A network of postal stations, Barid, connected major cities, facilitating communication and commerce. The Mamluks constructed numerous caravanserais, khans, along trade routes, including the impressive Khan al-Tujar near Mount Tabor. Mamluk architecture transformed Palestine's urban landscape. Jerusalem received particular attention, with the western portion of the Haram al-Sharif developed into a complex of madrasas, including the Ashrafiyya and Tankitsiyya. The Mamluks established distinctive architectural elements including ablaq, alternating colored stone courses, muqarnas, stalactite vaulting, and geometric decoration. Similar building programs enhanced Hebron, Gaza, and Ramla. Economic policies under the Mamluks initially stimulated trade and agriculture. Palestine exported cotton, sugar, rice, and soap to European markets, particularly Venice and Genoa. Archaeological evidence from Mamluk period villages shows prosperity in the 14th century, with expanded settlement and agricultural production. However, the Black Death, 1348-1349 CE, devastated the population, with contemporary sources suggesting mortality rates of 30–40% in urban centers. The later Mamluk period witnessed economic decline accelerated by oppressive taxation and administrative corruption. The IQTA system, land grants to military officers, evolved into exploitative tax farming. Rural depopulation increased as peasants fled excessive demands. Bedouin incursions expanded into formerly cultivated areas, particularly in the Jordan Valley and southern Palestine. European maritime discoveries redirected trade routes away from the eastern Mediterranean, further reducing commercial revenues. Ottoman rule, 1516–1917 CE. The Ottoman conquest of Palestine followed Sultan Selim I's defeat of the Mamluks at the Battle of Marj-Dabik in 1516 CE. Jerusalem surrendered without resistance in December 1516, beginning 4 centuries of Ottoman rule. The transition brought immediate administrative changes, with Palestine divided into the Sanjaks districts of Jerusalem, Gaza, Nablus, Lajun, and Safad within the Damascus Eyalet province. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, 1520–1566 CE, initiated extensive construction projects in Palestine, most notably rebuilding Jerusalem's walls between 1537 and 1541 CE. These massive fortifications, still standing today, included 7 gates and numerous towers. Suleiman also renovated Jerusalem's water supply system, constructing the Arab aqueduct and restoring ancient pools. His architectural patronage extended to religious buildings, including the Taqiyya soup kitchen complex near the Haram al-Sharif. The early Ottoman period, 16th–17th centuries, brought relative stability and prosperity to Palestine. Population records from tax registers, Defter-e Mufassal, indicate demographic growth, with approximately 250,000 inhabitants in the 1550s. Agricultural production diversified, with cotton becoming particularly important in coastal regions. Trade networks expanded, connecting Palestine to Istanbul, Egypt, and European markets. The annual Hajj caravan from Damascus to Mecca passed through Palestine, stimulating commerce and infrastructure development. Religious communities reorganized under the Ottoman millet system, which granted recognized non-Muslim groups internal autonomy under their religious leadership. The Jewish population increased significantly, particularly after the 1492 expulsion from Spain, with Safed emerging as a center of Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah. Scholars like Joseph Caro and Isaac Luria established Safed as a major intellectual center, producing influential works including the Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law. Ottoman governance quality declined noticeably after Suleiman's death. The 17th century brought increasing decentralization as the empire struggled with military setbacks and financial difficulties. Local notable families, Ayyan, gained influence, particularly in Jerusalem, where the Husseini, Khalidi, and Nashashibi families established multi-generational control over key religious and administrative positions. The 18th century witnessed further deterioration in central authority. Bedouin tribes expanded their territory and influence, sometimes controlling major routes and collecting unauthorized protection payments. Dahir al-Umar established a semi-autonomous territory in Galilee, 1730–1775, developing Acre as his capital and promoting agricultural development, particularly cotton production. His successor, Ahmad Pasha al-Jazar, the Butcher, successfully defended Acre against Napoleon's siege in 1799 while maintaining practical independence from Istanbul despite nominal Ottoman loyalty. Palestine's rural economy transformed significantly during the Ottoman period. By the 18th century, much agricultural land had been converted to iltizam, tax farms, controlled by urban notables or incorporated into imperial waqfs, religious endowments. Peasants, fellahin, faced increasing exploitation from absentee landlords and tax collectors. Village life centered around the hamula, extended family clan, as a protective social unit. Traditional agricultural methods persisted with limited technological innovation compared to contemporaneous European developments. The 19th century brought attempted reforms under the Tanzimat movement, 1839 to 1876. The Ottoman Land Code of 1858 sought to regularize land ownership, requiring registration of agricultural properties. However, many peasants avoided registration, fearing increased taxation, while urban notables and foreign investors registered large tracts in their names. This process accelerated the concentration of land ownership and created legal foundations for later conflicts. Egyptian rule under Muhammad Ali Pasha and his son Ibrahim Pasha, 1831 to 1840, introduced significant changes during their brief control of Palestine. Administrative centralization, conscription, disarmament of the population, and religious equality policies modernized governance but provoked resistance, particularly the 1834 Peasants' Revolt. After Ottoman restoration, the Tanzimat reforms continued this modernization process, though implementation remained inconsistent. The late Ottoman period witnessed significant demographic changes. Overall population increased from approximately 350,000 in 1850 to 700,000 by 1914. European consulates established presences in Jerusalem, Jaffa, and Haifa, bringing diplomatic protection for Christian communities and facilitating Western economic penetration. Jewish immigration increased substantially with the First Aliyah, 1882 to 1903, bringing approximately 35,000 primarily Russian Jews following pogroms and persecution. Agricultural colonies established during this period, including Petah Tikva, Rishon LeZion, and Zikron Yaakov, introduced modern farming techniques and new organizational models. Infrastructure development accelerated in the late 19th century. The Jerusalem-Jaffa Road, completed in 1868, facilitated pilgrim and commercial traffic. The Jaffa-Jerusalem Railway opened in 1892, the first modern transportation link in the region. Telegraph lines connected major cities by the 1860s. Urban growth transformed Jaffa and Haifa into significant ports, while Jerusalem expanded beyond its walls with new Jewish, Christian, and Muslim neighborhoods. Educational institutions proliferated during this period. Ottoman state schools taught a modernized curriculum alongside traditional religious education. Christian missionary schools, including the Anglican Christ Church School, 1840, provided Western-style education. The Alliance Israelite Universelle established schools for Jewish communities beginning in 1870. Muslim reformers founded modern institutions like the Raudat al-Ma'arif School in Jerusalem, 1906. The Young Turk Revolution of 1908 briefly raised hopes for democratic reform before giving way to increasingly centralized and Turkish nationalist policies. Ottoman entry into World War I in 1914 brought military occupation, requisitioning of supplies, and conscription. Cemal Pasha's harsh administration, 1915-1917, included deportations, executions of Arab nationalists, and severe food shortages. By the time British forces under General Allenby captured Jerusalem in December 1917, Ottoman rule had created deep resentment among much of the population while simultaneously laying foundations for modern state structures that would influence subsequent developments. The Ottoman legacy in Palestine remains complex and contested. 4 centuries of rule left indelible marks on the region's physical landscape, legal systems, social organization, and cultural expressions. The late Ottoman reforms, though often implemented imperfectly, initiated modernization processes that continued under subsequent administrations. The empire's decline and eventual collapse created the conditions for European colonial intervention and competing nationalist movements that would shape Palestine's turbulent 20th century history. British Mandate and the Creation of Israel, 1917 to 1948. The 3 decades of British rule in Palestine transformed the region irrevocably, setting the stage for the establishment of Israel and the Palestinian dispossession that continues to shape the Middle East today. This period witnessed the implementation of the Balfour Declaration's promises, waves of Jewish immigration that altered Palestine's demographic landscape, Palestinian resistance movements, and ultimately the collapse of British authority amid escalating communal violence, British control, and the Balfour Declaration. On December 11, 1917, General Edmund Allenby entered Jerusalem on foot through the Jaffa Gate, a deliberate gesture of respect for the Holy City. This symbolic act marked the end of 4 centuries of Ottoman rule and the beginning of British military administration in Palestine. Behind this military conquest lay a diplomatic document that would profoundly shape the region's future. The Balfour Declaration, issued on November 2, 1917, represented a remarkable diplomatic achievement for the Zionist movement. In a carefully worded letter to Lord Rothschild, British Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour committed His Majesty's government to view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. The declaration's ambiguous phrasing, promising a national home rather than a state, reflected deliberate diplomatic caution, while its assurance that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities acknowledged the predominantly Arab population. Multiple factors influenced Britain's decision to issue this declaration. Strategic considerations predominated, securing influence in the Middle East, particularly protecting the Suez Canal and routes to India. Some British officials, including Prime Minister David Lloyd George and Balfour himself, held ideological sympathies with Zionism, influenced by both religious and imperial thinking. Additionally, Britain hoped to gain Jewish support for the Allied war effort, particularly in Russia and the United States. Crucially, the declaration made no mention of Palestinian self-determination or political rights, referring only to civil and religious rights. This omission reflected the prevailing colonial mindset that viewed indigenous populations as objects rather than subjects of policy. The declaration's issuance without consultation with Palestine's Arab majority established a pattern of external powers determining the region's fate that would continue throughout the Mandate period. The San Remo Conference, April 19 through 26, 1920, formalized British control over Palestine, with the League of Nations officially approving the British Mandate in July 1922. The Mandate's text incorporated the Balfour Declaration and recognized the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine. It also established Hebrew as an official language alongside Arabic and English, a significant victory for the Zionist movement's cultural revival project. In 1921, Colonial Secretary Winston Churchill divided the Mandate territory, creating Transjordan, later Jordan, east of the Jordan River under Emir Abdullah, while maintaining direct rule over Palestine west of the river. This division reduced the territory available for the proposed Jewish national home by approximately 77%, though it did not diminish Zionist determination to establish a state in the remaining territory. Mandate administration and competing nationalisms. Sir Herbert Samuel, a British Jew sympathetic to Zionism, became the first High Commissioner of Palestine, 1920 to 1925. His administration established the foundations of governance, creating separate religious court systems and implementing immigration policies based on the territory's economic absorptive capacity. This principle, formalized in the 1922 Churchill White Paper, attempted to balance Zionist aspirations with Arab concerns by linking Jewish immigration to economic development. The Mandate period witnessed the development of parallel national institutions. The Zionist movement established the Histadrut, General Federation of Labor, in 1920, which became not merely a labor union but a comprehensive state-building institution, providing health services, education, and economic enterprises. The Jewish Agency, recognized by the British as the official representative body of Jews in Palestine, functioned effectively as a government in waiting. The Haganah, established in 1920 as a self-defense force, gradually evolved into a sophisticated military organization. Palestinian Arab political organization developed more unevenly, hampered by internal divisions and British restrictions. The Muslim-Christian associations formed in various cities between 1918 and 1920, while the Arab Executive Committee emerged from the Third Palestinian Arab Congress in 1920. The Supreme Muslim Council, established by the British in 1921 and led by Haj Amin al-Husseini, appointed Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, became an important vehicle for Palestinian nationalism, though its religious foundation complicated relations with Christian Arabs. Land acquisition formed a central pillar of the Zionist project. The Jewish National Fund systematically purchased land, often from absentee Arab landowners based in Beirut, Damascus, or Cairo. These transactions frequently resulted in the eviction of Palestinian tenant farmers who had cultivated the land for generations. By 1947, Jewish land ownership had increased from approximately 2% to about 7% of Palestine's total land area, a modest percentage that nonetheless included some of the most fertile agricultural land. Immigration and demographic transformation. Jewish immigration during the Mandate period occurred in distinct waves that transformed Palestine's demographic landscape. The Third Aliyah, 1919 to 1923, brought approximately 40,000 immigrants, primarily from Eastern Europe. Many were influenced by socialist Zionism and established collective agricultural settlements, kibbutzim, that became important symbols of the Zionist enterprise. The Fourth Aliyah, 1924 to 1929, brought about 82,000 immigrants, including many middle-class Polish Jews fleeing economic anti-Semitism. This wave contributed significantly to urban development, particularly in Tel Aviv, founded in 1909 as the first modern Jewish city. The Fifth Aliyah, 1933 to 1939, represented the largest influx, with approximately 250,000 immigrants, many German Jews escaping Nazi persecution. This wave included substantial numbers of professionals, academics, and entrepreneurs who contributed significantly to economic and cultural development. By 1939, the Jewish population of Palestine had risen to approximately 445,000, nearly 30% of the total population, compared to less than 10% at the beginning of the Mandate. This demographic transformation generated profound anxiety among the Palestinian Arab population, who increasingly feared becoming a minority in their own land. British attempts to regulate immigration through quota systems satisfied neither community. Jews viewed them as cruel restrictions, particularly as the Nazi threat intensified in Europe, while Arabs saw any Jewish immigration as threatening their national aspirations. Escalating conflict and British policy shifts. Intercommunal violence punctuated the Mandate period, with each outbreak more severe than the last. The 1920 Nebi Musa riots in Jerusalem resulted in 9 deaths and 244 injuries. More serious violence erupted in 1929, triggered by disputes over access to the Western Wall. The resulting riots spread throughout the country, with the massacre of 67 Jews in Hebron effectively ending that city's ancient Jewish community. In total, the 1929 violence left 133 Jews and 116 Arabs dead. The Shah Commission, investigating the 1929 riots, concluded that Arab fears of Jewish domination and land dispossession were primary causes of violence. This assessment influenced the 1930 Passfield White Paper, which recommended restrictions on Jewish immigration and land purchases. However, Zionist diplomatic pressure led to the partial retraction of these recommendations in Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald's letter to Chaim Weizmann in 1931, known derisively by Arabs as the Black Letter. The most significant Palestinian resistance was the Great Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939. It began with a 6-month general strike called by the newly formed Arab Higher Committee and evolved into an armed insurrection that lasted 3 years. The revolt represented the most sustained Palestinian challenge to British rule and Zionist settlement. The British response was severe, deploying over 100,000 troops and employing harsh counterinsurgency tactics, including collective punishment, house demolitions, and executions. By the revolt's end, approximately 5,000 Arabs had been killed, 15,000 wounded, and 5,600 imprisoned. The revolt significantly weakened Palestinian society by eliminating many political leaders and depleting resources, hampering their ability to respond effectively to later challenges. The Peel Commission, 1937, established to investigate the causes of the revolt, concluded that the mandate was unworkable and recommended partition into Jewish and Arab states with a British-controlled corridor from Jerusalem to the sea. This marked the first official proposal for partition. Both sides initially rejected the plan, though the Zionist leadership later accepted the principle of partition while negotiating for more favorable boundaries. The 1939 White Paper represented a dramatic shift in British policy, restricting Jewish immigration to 75,000 over 5 years and limiting land purchases. This policy, implemented as European Jews desperately sought escape from Nazi persecution, was denounced by Zionist leaders as a betrayal. David Ben-Gurion, chairman of the Jewish Agency Executive, declared, "We shall fight with Great Britain in this war as if there was no White Paper, and we shall fight the White Paper as if there was no war." World War II and the path to partition World War II transformed the political landscape. Over 30,000 Palestinian Jews enlisted in the British forces, gaining valuable military experience. The Jewish Agency simultaneously continued illegal immigration operations, Aliyah Bet, bringing approximately 70,000 Jews to Palestine despite British restrictions. The tragic fate of European Jewry under Nazi rule, 6 million murdered in the Holocaust, created moral pressure for a Jewish state and a sense of urgency among Zionist leaders. The Biltmore program, adopted by Zionist leaders in 1942, explicitly called for a Jewish state in Palestine for the first time. Meanwhile, more militant Jewish groups, the Irgun led by Menachem Begin and Lehi, initially led by Avraham Stern, launched armed campaigns against British rule. The British response included Operation Agatha in June 1946, arresting over 2,700 Jews. Jewish underground groups escalated attacks on British targets, culminating in the bombing of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem in July 1946, killing 91 people. By 1947, exhausted by World War II and facing resistance from both communities, Britain announced its intention to terminate the mandate and referred the question of Palestine's future to the newly formed United Nations. The UN Special Committee on Palestine, UNSCOP, recommended partition into Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem under international administration. On November 29, 1947, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 181, recommending this partition plan. The vote, 33 in favor, 13 against, 10 abstentions, reflected the emerging Cold War alignment, with both the United States and Soviet Union supporting partition. The Zionist leadership accepted the plan, while Palestinian leaders and Arab states rejected it, considering it a fundamental injustice to award over half the territory to a minority population. Civil war and the establishment of Israel. Civil war erupted immediately after the partition vote. The Haganah implemented Plan Dalet, designed to secure territory allocated to the Jewish state and key corridors. This military campaign resulted in the depopulation of numerous Palestinian villages and urban neighborhoods. The Deir Yassin massacre on April 9, 1948, where Irgun and Lehi forces killed approximately 100 Palestinian villagers, became emblematic of the violence and accelerated Palestinian exodus. Palestinians also engaged in violence, including attacks on Jewish settlements and the siege of Jewish Jerusalem. On April 13, 1948, a medical convoy to Mount Scopus was attacked, resulting in 78 Jewish deaths. By May 1948, approximately 300,000 Palestinians had already fled or been expelled from their homes. On May 14, 1948, as the British Mandate officially ended, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. The following day, armies from Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq invaded, beginning the First Arab-Israeli War. Despite initial setbacks, Israeli forces ultimately prevailed, expanding beyond the UN partition boundaries. By the time armistice agreements were signed in 1949, Israel controlled approximately 78% of former Mandatory Palestine, substantially more than the 56% allocated in the UN partition plan. The remaining territories came under Egyptian control, Gaza Strip, and Jordanian control, West Bank, including East Jerusalem. No Palestinian state emerged from the conflict. The war resulted in the displacement of approximately 700,000 Palestinians, an event Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, catastrophe. More than 400 Palestinian villages were depopulated or destroyed, and most refugees were unable to return to their homes in what became Israel. The UN established the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, in December 1949 to provide assistance to these refugees, an organization that continues to operate to day. Israel rapidly consolidated its statehood, passing legislation, including the Absentee Property Law, 1950, that prevented refugee return and transferred abandoned property to state control. The Law of Return, passed in 1950, granted every Jew the right to immigrate to Israel, fulfilling the Zionist vision of a Jewish homeland while cementing the demographic transformation of Palestine. The British Mandate period thus concluded with a profound transformation of Palestine, the establishment of a Jewish state on 78% of the territory, the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, and the beginning of a conflict that continues to this day. The seeds planted by the Balfour Declaration had borne fruit, though in a manner far bloodier and more contentious than its authors might have imagined. Israeli-Palestinian conflict, 1948-present. The aftermath of Israel's establishment and the Palestinian Nakba initiated a protracted conflict that has defined the Middle East for over 7 decades. This period has been marked by recurring wars, shifting diplomatic paradigms, persistent occupation, and evolving forms of Palestinian resistance. The conflict has transformed both Israeli and Palestinian societies while repeatedly drawing in regional and global powers, making it one of the world's most intractable geopolitical challenges. Post-1948 realities and early conflict. The 1949 armistice agreements left the territory of former mandatory Palestine divided into 3 distinct political entities. The new state of Israel controlled 78% of the territory, including Western Jerusalem and areas beyond the UN partition plan boundaries. Jordan annexed the West Bank and East Jerusalem in April 1950, a move recognized only by Britain and Pakistan. Egypt established military administration over the Gaza Strip but did not claim sovereignty. Notably absent was any Palestinian political entity. For the approximately 150,000 Palestinians who remained within Israel's borders, military administration was imposed until 1966. This system restricted movement, controlled economic activity, and confiscated land under various legal mechanisms, including the Absentee Property Law of 1950. These Palestinians eventually received Israeli citizenship but faced systematic discrimination in resource allocation, employment, and political rights. The 700,000 Palestinian refugees dispersed across the region faced dire humanitarian conditions. In Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, hastily established refugee camps became permanent fixtures. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, provided essential services but could not resolve the fundamental political issues. Israel categorically rejected refugee return, passing the Law of Return in 1950 that granted immigration rights to Jews worldwide, while denying the same right to displaced Palestinians. Israel rapidly consolidated statehood through intensive state-building efforts. Between 1948 and 1951, approximately 687,000 Jewish immigrants arrived, doubling the Jewish population. Many were Mizrahi Jews from Arab countries who fled or were expelled following the establishment of Israel and the subsequent deterioration of their position in Arab societies. Their arrival transformed Israel's demographic composition, which had previously been dominated by European Jews. The early 1950s witnessed significant border violence. Palestinian refugees conducted cross-border raids into Israel, while Israel launched retaliatory operations of increasing scale. The Israeli military adopted a policy of massive retaliation, exemplified by operations like the October 1953 attack on the Jordanian village of Kibbutz, led by Unit 101 under Ariel Sharon, which killed 69 villagers, mostly women and children. The Suez Crisis and its aftermath. The 1956 Suez Crisis marked Israel's first major military collaboration with European powers. Following Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser's nationalization of the Suez Canal, Israel invaded the Sinai Peninsula in coordination with Britain and France. Israeli forces reached the Suez Canal in just 1 week before international pressure, particularly from the United States and Soviet Union, forced a withdrawal. Though brief, this conflict established important precedents. Israel demonstrated military superiority over Arab conventional forces while simultaneously revealing the constraints imposed by superpower politics. The crisis also strengthened Egyptian nationalism under Nasser and accelerated the decline of British and French influence in the region. The period between 1956 and 1967 saw the emergence of Palestinian national organizations independent of Arab state control. Fatah, founded in Kuwait in 1959 by Yasser Arafat, Khalil al-Wazir, Abu Jihad, and others, began military operations against Israel in January 1965. The Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, established by the Arab League in 1964 under Ahmad Shukeri, initially functioned as an instrument of Arab state policy rather than an independent Palestinian movement. Water disputes contributed significantly to regional tensions during this period. Israel's National Water Carrier Project, completed in 1964, diverted water from the Jordan River system, prompting Arab states to attempt their own diversion projects. These competing water claims heightened military tensions along the Syrian-Israeli border. The Six-Day War and its consequences. The Six-Day War of June 1967 transformed the conflict fundamentally. Tensions escalated in May 1967 when Egypt requested the withdrawal of UN peacekeeping forces from the Sinai Peninsula and imposed a blockade on Israeli shipping through the Straits of Tiran. On June 5th, Israel launched preemptive airstrikes against Egyptian airfields, destroying most of Egypt's air force on the ground. Israel then defeated Egyptian, Jordanian, and Syrian forces in rapid succession. By June 10th, Israel had captured the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, the Gaza Strip and Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria. This military victory tripled the territory under Israeli control and brought approximately 1 million Palestinians under Israeli military occupation. The war's outcome had profound psychological impacts on both societies. For Israelis, the swift victory following a period of existential fear generated euphoria and a sense of invincibility. For Palestinians and Arab states, the defeat was humiliating and discredited Arab nationalist ideologies. The war also created approximately 300,000 new Palestinian refugees, many experiencing displacement for the second time. On November 22, 1967, the UN Security Council unanimously adopted Resolution 242, establishing the principle of land for peace that would guide subsequent diplomatic efforts. The resolution called for withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict and the termination of all claims or states of belligerency. The deliberate ambiguity in the English text, omitting the or all before territories, allowed conflicting interpretations that complicated peace efforts for decades. Israel immediately annexed East Jerusalem, applying Israeli law to the expanded municipal boundaries. In the West Bank and Gaza, Israel established military administration and began constructing settlements in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which prohibits an occupying power from transferring its civilian population into occupied territory. The first settlement, Kfar Etzion, was established in September 1967, followed by others in strategic locations throughout the occupied territories. Palestinian resistance and the PLO's rise. The 1967 defeat accelerated the transformation of Palestinian politics. Fatah, led by Yasser Arafat, gained control of the PLO in 1969, shifting its orientation from Arab state sponsorship toward independent Palestinian nationalism. The PLO established a quasi-state apparatus in Jordan, from which Palestinian factions launched attacks against Israel. This period witnessed the emergence of various Palestinian resistance organizations with different ideological orientations. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, founded by George Habash in 1967, adopted a Marxist-Leninist ideology and pioneered international airplane hijackings as a tactic. The Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, DFLP, established in 1969 by Naif Hawatmeh as a splinter from the PFLP, emphasized Marxist theory and class struggle. These groups, along with Fatah and smaller factions, formed the core of the PLO. Palestinian armed groups engaged in various forms of resistance, including cross-border raids, airplane hijackings, and attacks on Israeli and Jewish targets worldwide. Notable incidents included the 1972 Munich Olympics attack by Black September, an offshoot of Fatah which killed 11 Israeli athletes and coaches. These actions generated international attention but also associated the Palestinian cause with terrorism in Western perceptions. Tensions between Palestinian armed groups and the Jordanian monarchy escalated into open conflict in September 1970, known as Black September. King Hussein's forces expelled the PLO from Jordan, killing thousands of Palestinians in the process. The PLO leadership relocated to Lebanon, establishing a new base of operations that would significantly impact Lebanese politics and society. The October War and diplomatic shifts. On October 6, 1973, Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack against Israeli forces in the Sinai Peninsula and Golan Heights. Initial Arab successes shattered the myth of Israeli invincibility before Israel counterattacked, eventually crossing the Suez Canal and encircling Egypt's Third Army. The war's outcome was ambiguous enough to allow both sides to claim victory. For Egypt, the initial military success restored national pride and created conditions for subsequent diplomacy. For Israel, the eventual battlefield recovery demonstrated resilience but revealed serious intelligence and military failures that prompted a national reckoning. The war triggered the 1973 to 1974 oil crisis when Arab oil-producing states imposed an embargo against countries supporting Israel, quadrupling oil prices globally. This demonstrated the Arab world's economic leverage and forced Western powers to reconsider their Middle East policies. U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger's shuttle diplomacy produced disengagement agreements between Israel and Egypt in January 1974 and between Israel and Syria in May 1974. These agreements established buffer zones monitored by UN forces and began a process of American-led diplomacy that marginalized Soviet influence in the region. The PLO achieved significant diplomatic recognition during this period. In October 1974, the Arab League recognized the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. The following month, Yasser Arafat addressed the UN General Assembly declaring, "I have come bearing an olive branch and a freedom fighter's gun. Do not let the olive branch fall from my hand." The General Assembly granted the PLO observer status and affirmed Palestinian rights to self-determination, national independence, and sovereignty. Lebanon Civil War and the Israeli invasion. Lebanon's fragile confessional political system collapsed into civil war in 1975, with the PLO's presence serving as a catalyst. Palestinian armed groups effectively established a state within a state in southern Lebanon and parts of Beirut, conducting operations against Israel and becoming entangled in Lebanese sectarian conflicts. Israel invaded southern Lebanon in March 1978, Operation Litani, in response to a Palestinian attack on an Israeli bus. The operation resulted in approximately 2,000 Lebanese and Palestinian deaths and the displacement of an estimated 100,000 to 250,000 people. UN Security Council Resolution 425 called for Israel's withdrawal and established the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL. Israel withdrew its forces but established a security zone controlled by the South Lebanon Army, SLA, an Israeli-backed militia. On June 6, 1982, Israel launched a full-scale invasion of Lebanon, Operation Peace for Galilee, with the stated aim of eliminating PLO infrastructure. Israeli forces besieged Beirut for 7 weeks before an internationally brokered agreement, allowed PLO fighters to evacuate to Tunisia and other Arab countries. The Israeli military facilitated the entry of Lebanese Christian Phalangist militias into the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps on September 16 or 18, 1982, where they massacred between 800 and 3,500 Palestinian civilians. An Israeli Commission of Inquiry found Defense Minister Ariel Sharon indirectly responsible, forcing his resignation. The Lebanon invasion achieved Israel's immediate goal of expelling the PLO leadership, but created new challenges. Hezbollah emerged as a more formidable adversary, while Israel became mired in an 18-year occupation of southern Lebanon that ended only in May 2000. The war also divided Israeli society, generating unprecedented protest movements like Peace Now, and eroding the national consensus on security policies. The First Intifada and the Peace Process. On December 8, 1987, an Israeli military vehicle collided with a civilian car in Gaza's Jabalia refugee camp, killing 4 Palestinians. This incident triggered spontaneous protests that rapidly spread throughout the occupied territories, developing into the First Intifada uprising. Unlike previous Palestinian resistance, the Intifada emerged from within the occupied territories rather than from external PLO leadership. The uprising featured mass civil disobedience, commercial strikes, tax resistance, and stone-throwing confrontations with Israeli forces. Local committees organized alternative education systems when schools were closed by military order and established mutual aid networks to sustain the population during prolonged curfews. Women played prominent roles in these grassroots organizing efforts. Israel responded with force, implementing a policy of might, power, and beatings articulated by Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Security forces used live ammunition, rubber-coated steel bullets, and mass arrests. By the Intifada's end in 1993, approximately 1,200 Palestinians and 160 Israelis had been killed. The Intifada coincided with significant regional and global developments. In July 1988, Jordan's King Hussein renounced claims to the West Bank, creating political space for Palestinian self-representation. In November 1988, the Palestine National Council, the PLO's legislative body, declared an independent Palestinian state and implicitly accepted a two-state solution based on UN Resolutions 242 and 338. The following month, Yasser Arafat recognized Israel's right to exist and renounced terrorism, leading to U.S.-PLO dialogue. The 1991 Gulf War reconfigured regional alliances. The PLO's support for Iraq damaged its relationships with key Arab financial backers and weakened its diplomatic position. Simultaneously, the Soviet Union's collapse eliminated a key patron for Arab states and the PLO, while enhancing American influence. These developments created conditions for the Madrid Conference in October 1991, which brought Israel, Syria, Lebanon, and a joint Jordanian-Palestinian delegation to direct negotiations for the first time. While the Madrid process produced limited concrete results, it established important precedents for subsequent peace efforts. Secret negotiations in Oslo, Norway, produced a breakthrough in Israeli-Palestinian relations. The resulting Declaration of Principles, Oslo One Accord, signed on the White House lawn on September 13, 1993, provided for mutual recognition between Israel and the PLO and established a framework for Palestinian interim self-government in parts of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The Oslo process continued with the Gaza-Jericho Agreement, May 1994, which established the Palestinian Authority, PA, and began Israeli military withdrawal from Gaza and Jericho. The Israeli-Palestinian Interim Agreement, Oslo II, in September 1995, divided the West Bank into areas A, full Palestinian control, B, Palestinian civil control, Israeli security control, and C, full Israeli control. By 1996, Israeli forces had withdrawn from major Palestinian population centers, and Palestinians had elected a legislative council and president. The peace process faced violent opposition from both sides. Hamas, Islamic resistance movement, founded in 1987 as an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, and Islamic Jihad conducted suicide bombings against Israeli civilian targets. Jewish extremist Baruch Goldstein massacred 29 Palestinians at Hebron's Ibrahimi Mosque in February 1994. On November 4, 1995, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by Yigal Amir, a right-wing Jewish extremist opposed to territorial compromise. Failed final status negotiations and the Second Intifada, the Oslo Accords deferred the most difficult issues: Jerusalem, refugees, settlements, security arrangements, and final borders, to permanent status negotiations meant to conclude by May 1999. This deadline passed without agreement as settlement expansion continued and Palestinian living conditions deteriorated. Between 1993 and 2000, the number of Israeli settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem increased from approximately 250,000 to 380,000. In July 2000, U.S. President Bill Clinton convened Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat at Camp David to negotiate a final status agreement. The summit ended without agreement, with each side blaming the other for the failure. Disputed accounts of the negotiations have fueled competing narratives about which side rejected peace. On September 28, 2000, Ariel Sharon, then leader of Israel's Likud party, visited the temple Mount Haram al-Sharif complex in Jerusalem with a large security detail. Palestinians viewed this as a provocative assertion of Israeli sovereignty over the contested holy site. Protests the following day were met with lethal force, catalyzing the Second Intifada. Unlike the First Intifada, the Second Uprising quickly militarized. Palestinian factions, including elements of Fatah's Tanzim and Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, employed firearms and suicide bombings against both military and civilian targets. Israel responded with unprecedented military force, including targeted assassinations, tank and helicopter gunship operations in urban areas, and extended curfews and closures. The violence escalated dramatically in March-April 2002, following a Hamas suicide bombing at a Passover Seder in Netanya that killed 30 Israelis. Israel launched Operation Defensive Shield, the largest military operation in the West Bank since 1967. The operation included a month-long siege of Arafat's compound in Ramallah and an intense two-week battle in Jenin refugee camp that destroyed approximately 400 homes. The Second Intifada resulted in approximately 3,000 Palestinian and 1,000 Israeli deaths between 2000 and 2005. The economic impact was devastating, with Palestinian GDP declining by approximately 40% in the first 2 years. Israel began construction of a separation barrier in 2002, ostensibly to prevent terrorist infiltration but effectively annexing approximately 9.4% of the West Bank. The International Court of Justice ruled in 2004 that the barrier's route through occupied territory violated international law. Gaza disengagement and the Hamas-Fatah split. In December 2003, Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon announced a plan to unilaterally withdraw Israeli settlements and military forces from the Gaza Strip. Implemented in August-September 2005, the disengagement evacuated approximately 8,000 settlers from 21 settlements in Gaza and 4 small settlements in the northern West Bank. Unlike previous withdrawals, this was not coordinated with the Palestinian Authority. Sharon's motivations combined strategic calculations with demographic concerns. The disengagement allowed Israel to argue that its occupation of Gaza had ended, though it maintained control of borders, airspace, and maritime access, while consolidating control over major West Bank settlement blocks. Sharon advisor Dov Weissglass candidly described the plan as formaldehyde that would freeze the peace process and prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. Palestinian legislative elections in January 2006 resulted in a surprise victory for Hamas, which won 74 of 132 seats. This outcome reflected public frustration with Fatah's corruption and the failure of the peace process to deliver tangible improvements in living conditions. The United States, European Union, Russia, and United Nations, the Quartet, responded by imposing conditions on the Hamas-led government, recognition of Israel, renunciation of violence, and acceptance of previous agreements. Tensions between Hamas and Fatah escalated into armed conflict in June 2007, resulting in Hamas's takeover of the Gaza Strip and Fatah's continued control of PA institutions in the West Bank. This split in Palestinian governance has persisted despite multiple reconciliation attempts, complicating peace efforts and humanitarian conditions. Israel and Egypt imposed a blockade on Gaza following Hamas's takeover, severely restricting movement of people and goods. The blockade devastated Gaza's economy, with unemployment reaching approximately 45% and poverty rates exceeding 50%. Periodic escalations of violence have further damaged infrastructure and civilian life. Recent developments and continuing occupation. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has continued without resolution, characterized by periodic violence, failed peace initiatives, and deteriorating conditions on the ground. Israel launched major military operations against Gaza in 2008-2009, Operation Cast-led, 2012 Operation Pillar of Defense, 2014 Operation Protective Edge, and 2021 Operation Guardian of the Walls. These operations resulted in thousands of Palestinian casualties, massive infrastructure damage, and relatively few Israeli casualties due to the Iron Dome missile defense system deployed in 2011. In the West Bank, settlement expansion has continued unabated. By 2023, approximately 700,000 Israeli settlers lived in the West Bank and East Jerusalem in settlements considered illegal under international law. The settlement enterprise has fragmented Palestinian territory through a complex system of bypass roads, checkpoints, and the separation barrier, making a contiguous Palestinian state increasingly difficult to envision. Palestinian politics has remained divided between Hamas in Gaza and the Fatah-dominated Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. President Mahmoud Abbas, who succeeded Yasser Arafat in 2005, has continued to govern despite his term officially ending in 2009. The PA has maintained security cooperation with Israel while pursuing international recognition, achieving non-member observer state status at the United Nations in 2012 and joining the International Criminal Court in 2015. Diplomatic efforts have yielded little progress. The Annapolis Conference, 2007, Obama administration initiatives, 2009 to 2016, and Trump administration's Peace to Prosperity Plan, 2020, all failed to produce lasting agreements. The Abraham Accords, signed in 2020, normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, but sidelined the Palestinian issue. The conflict has increasingly been characterized by asymmetric power relations. Israel maintains one of the world's most powerful militaries and a dynamic economy, while Palestinians remain stateless, divided, and economically dependent. This power imbalance has shifted the Palestinian struggle toward international advocacy, including the boycott, divestment, and sanctions BDS movement launched in 2005. Human rights organizations have increasingly characterized Israeli policies as apartheid. In 2021, Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem, an Israeli human rights organization, both published reports concluding that Israeli authorities are committing the crimes against humanity of apartheid and persecution. The International Criminal Court has opened an investigation into alleged war crimes in the occupied Palestinian territories since 2014. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains one of the world's most intractable disputes, with profound implications for regional stability, international relations, and the lives of millions of Israelis and Palestinians. After more than 7 decades, the fundamental issues, competing national claims to the same land, the status of Jerusalem, Palestinian refugees' right of return, security concerns, and water rights, remain unresolved, perpetuating a cycle of violence, occupation, and human suffering that shows no immediate signs of resolution. Oslo Accords and the peace process secret negotiations in Oslo, Norway, produced a breakthrough in Israeli-Palestinian relations. The resulting Declaration of Principles, Oslo Accord, signed on the White House lawn on September 13, 1993, provided for mutual recognition between Israel and the PLO and established a framework for Palestinian interim self-government in parts of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The Oslo process continued with the Gaza-Jericho Agreement, May 1994, which established the Palestinian Authority, PA, and began Israeli military withdrawal from Gaza and Jericho. The Israeli-Palestinian Interim Agreement, Oslo II, in September 1995, divided the West Bank into areas A, full Palestinian control, B, Palestinian civil control, Israeli security control, and C, full Israeli control. By 1996, Israeli forces had withdrawn from major Palestinian population centers, and Palestinians had elected a legislative council and president. The Oslo Accords were intended to initiate a 5-year transitional period leading to a permanent status agreement. However, the process faced significant challenges from the outset. The agreements deferred the most difficult issues: Jerusalem, refugees, settlements, security arrangements, and final borders, to permanent status negotiations. The territorial fragmentation created by the Oslo II agreement left Palestinians with direct control of only about 18% of the West Bank, Area A, while Israel retained full control of 60%, Area C. Settlement expansion continued and even accelerated during the Oslo period. Between 1993 and 2000, the number of Israeli settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem increased from approximately 250,000 to 380,000. Economic conditions for Palestinians deteriorated due to Israeli closure policies that restricted movement between Palestinian areas. Violent opposition emerged from both sides. Hamas and Islamic Jihad conducted suicide bombings against Israeli civilian targets, killing hundreds. Jewish extremist Baruch Goldstein massacred 29 Palestinians at Hebron's Ibrahimi Mosque in February 1994. The assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin on November 4, 1995, by right-wing Jewish extremist Yigal Amir dealt a severe blow to the peace process. Rabin's successor, Shimon Peres, lost the May 1996 election to Benjamin Netanyahu, who had campaigned against the Oslo Accords. Netanyahu's government slowed implementation of agreed withdrawals while accelerating settlement construction. The election of Ehud Barak as Israeli Prime Minister in May 1999 briefly revived the peace process. Barak withdrew Israeli forces from southern Lebanon in May 2000 and sought a comprehensive agreement with the Palestinians. In July 2000, U.S. President Bill Clinton convened Barak and PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat at Camp David to negotiate a final status agreement. The Camp David summit ended without agreement, with each side blaming the other for the failure. Israeli proposals included Palestinian sovereignty over most of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, but maintained Israeli control over key settlement blocks, parts of East Jerusalem, and security arrangements. Palestinians rejected these terms as insufficient, particularly regarding Jerusalem and refugee rights. Disputed accounts of the negotiations have fueled competing narratives about which side rejected peace. Clinton presented bridging proposals in December 2000 that expanded Palestinian sovereignty in Jerusalem and offered limited refugee return. These parameters form the basis for further negotiations at Taba, Egypt, in January 2001, where the sides reportedly came closer to agreement before talks were suspended due to upcoming Israeli elections. The Second Intifada and its aftermath. On September 28, 2000, Ariel Sharon, then leader of Israel's Likud party, visited the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif complex in Jerusalem with a large security detail. Palestinians viewed this as a provocative assertion of Israeli sovereignty over the contested holy site. Protests the following day were met with lethal force, catalyzing the Second Intifada. Unlike the First Intifada, the Second Uprising quickly militarized. Palestinian factions, including elements of Fatah's Tanzim and Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad, employed firearms and suicide bombings against both military and civilian targets. Between 2000 and 2005, Palestinian suicide bombings killed approximately 1,000 Israelis, with attacks targeting buses, restaurants, and other civilian locations. Israel responded with unprecedented military force, including targeted assassinations, tank and helicopter gunship operations in urban areas, and extended curfews and closures. The violence escalated dramatically in March-April 2002, following a Hamas suicide bombing at a Passover Seder in Netanya that killed 30 Israelis. Israel launched Operation Defensive Shield, the largest military operation in the West Bank since 1967. The operation included a month-long siege of Arafat's compound in Ramallah and an intense two-week battle in Jenin refugee camp that destroyed approximately 400 homes. The Second Intifada resulted in approximately 3,000 Palestinian and 1,000 Israeli deaths between 2000 and 2005. The economic impact was devastating, with Palestinian GDP declining by approximately 40% in the first 2 years. Israel began construction of a separation barrier in 2002, ostensibly to prevent terrorist infiltration but effectively annexing approximately 9.4% of the West Bank. The International Court of Justice ruled in 2004 that the barrier's route through occupied territory violated international law. The death of Yasser Arafat in November 2004 and the election of Mahmoud Abbas as PA president in January 2005 facilitated a gradual winding down of the Intifada. Abbas worked to restore security cooperation with Israel and rein in militant groups. Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon and Abbas declared a formal end to the Intifada at the Sharm el-Sheikh summit in February 2005. Gaza disengagement and the Hamas-Fatah split. In December 2003, Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon announced a plan to unilaterally withdraw Israeli settlements and military forces from the Gaza Strip. Implemented in August-September 2005, the disengagement evacuated approximately 8,000 settlers from 21 settlements in Gaza and 4 small settlements in the northern West Bank. Unlike previous withdrawals, this was not coordinated with the Palestinian Authority. Sharon's motivations combined strategic calculations with demographic concerns. The disengagement allowed Israel to argue that its occupation of Gaza had ended, though it maintained control of borders, airspace, and maritime access, while consolidating control over major West Bank settlement blocks. Sharon advisor Dov Weissglass candidly described the plan as formaldehyde that would freeze the peace process and prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. Palestinian legislative elections in January 2006 resulted in a surprise victory for Hamas, which won 74 of 132 seats. This outcome reflected public frustration with Fatah's corruption and the failure of the peace process to deliver tangible improvements in living conditions. The United States, European Union, Russia, and United Nations, the Quartet, responded by imposing conditions on the Hamas-led government, recognition of Israel, renunciation of violence, and acceptance of previous agreements. Tensions between Hamas and Fatah escalated into armed conflict in June 2007, resulting in Hamas's takeover of the Gaza Strip and Fatah's continued control of PA institutions in the West Bank. This split in Palestinian governance has persisted despite multiple reconciliation attempts, complicating peace efforts and humanitarian conditions. Israel and Egypt imposed a blockade on Gaza following Hamas's takeover, severely restricting movement of people and goods. The blockade devastated Gaza's economy, with unemployment reaching approximately 45% and poverty rates exceeding 50%. According to a 2012 UN report, Gaza would become unlivable by 2020 if conditions did not improve. Gaza conflicts and failed peace initiatives. Israel has conducted several major military operations in Gaza since the Hamas takeover, Operation Cast Lead, December 2008, January 2009. Following increased rocket fire from Gaza, Israel launched a 3-week military campaign that killed approximately 1,400 Palestinians, including at least 762 civilians and 13 Israelis. The UN-commissioned Goldstone report concluded that both Israel and Hamas had committed potential war crimes. Operation Pillar of Defense, November 2012. This 8-day operation began with Israel's assassination of Hamas military chief Ahmed Jabari and included airstrikes against Hamas infrastructure. The conflict resulted in 167 Palestinian and 6 Israeli deaths before an Egyptian-brokered ceasefire. Operation Protective Edge, July-August 2014. The longest and most destructive Gaza conflict began after the kidnapping and murder of 3 Israeli teenagers in the West Bank and subsequent Israeli crackdown on Hamas. The 50-day war included a ground invasion and resulted in 2,051 Palestinian deaths, including 1,062 civilians, and 73 Israeli deaths, including 6 civilians. Approximately 18,000 housing units in Gaza were destroyed or severely damaged. Operation Guardian of the Walls, May 2021. Tensions over potential evictions of Palestinian families in East Jerusalem's Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood and Israeli police actions at the Al-Aqsa Mosque escalated into an 11-day conflict. Hamas fired over 4,300 rockets toward Israel, while Israeli airstrikes severely damaged Gaza infrastructure. The conflict resulted in 256 Palestinian and 13 Israeli deaths. These recurring conflicts followed a pattern: Hamas rocket fire, often preceded by Israeli actions in Jerusalem or the West Bank; Israeli military response, international mediation, ceasefire, partial reconstruction, and eventual resumption of hostilities. Each cycle further damaged Gaza's infrastructure and civilian population while failing to produce lasting political solutions. Diplomatic efforts to resolve the broader conflict yielded little progress. The Annapolis Conference, November 2007, Obama administration initiatives, 2009-2016, and Trump administration's Peace to Prosperity Plan, 2020, all failed to produce lasting agreements. The Abraham Accords, signed in 2020, normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, but sidelined the Palestinian issue. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains unresolved, with fundamental issues, Jerusalem, refugees, settlements, borders, and security, continuing to fuel tensions and violence.